What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Archi-Tech Network. It's been a little while, but we have, as I said offline, we've been away on a little summer break whilst we regroup and recharge. But we decided to come back with a new podcast and a bunch of new courses. So we decided to focus on these two things for the time being. Our podcast, which is now, as you can see, video-based. We are going to be tweaking the format of this. We're going to keep with the video style. We want to work out a way to bring in live audiences so you guys can ask guests questions directly. Right now, though, you'll see that we'll post upcoming guests and we'll ask you to send questions via Instagram or any of our other platforms. Otherwise, the other aspect we're concentrating on is we've been developing and are currently recording a series of courses in Rhino, Rhino Inside, Revit, and Enscape to go along with our Grasshopper Masterclass, which is available now. You can check it out on Archi-Tech.network, and you can go and watch that now. But stay tuned, because over the next few months, we're going to be releasing one of these courses every month or two. So stay tuned for that. But without any further ado, we're going to jump back into our podcast. And there's one topic that's been on fire since we've been away on a little summer break, and that is the introduction of AI into architecture. And, you know, we've seen online this kind of flurry of images coming, or image generation platforms like MidJourney and Dalle, and it's kind of taken the architecture world by storm. You know, people are kind of discussing it. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? People are kind of blown away by what these platforms can create. So we thought there's no better way to pick up the podcast and talk about this topic. And so today we are going to be talking about Archi-Tech Network podcast number 38, AI Architecture, with our guest, Will Garner. So Will, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, hey, it's awesome to be here after so long of us kind of going back and forth. So yeah, should be good.
No. So I thought I'll give the audience a little bit of an introduction for those of them who may not know you yet. So Will, you're currently studying at Loughborough University, right? You're currently studying a master's. You've been kind of pursuing this interest in AI and architecture, and I mean, over the last few months, your kind of social media presence and your Instagram has kind of blown up, and I've seen you kind of experimenting with different types of AI in the industry. You always seem to be one step ahead of what everyone is doing, which is super interesting. But yeah, I thought you'd be a great guest to bring on and have a discussion about. As I said in the intro, you know, the main thing that's happened over this summer is like this explosion of people jumping onto, you know, mostly MidJourney and then Dalle and these other kind of platforms. But yeah, so you're kind of studying at the moment, but you're really pursuing this interest in AI, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe I'll just take you through a bit like about the whole kind of journey so far. I've been in and out of practice in uni for like 10 years now in a way. So like I first got into the kind of construction industry by doing an apprenticeship with Van Nuttall as like a civil engineer, and sort of completing that, I wanted to sidestep into design a bit more. So I actually did another degree at Loughborough pre this kind of set of degrees is in architectural engineering. And,
nice.
you know, from finishing that, I then moved to London and worked in an architectural practice and was basically in the architectural technologist role, the BIM kind of guy. And again, like at that point...
Fellow BIM guy, I didn't know that.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
I like it.
Sort of just like the tech guy in the office, just kind of helping people get through. And but at the same time, you know, whilst I was in London in the practice, I was getting into like design and architecture more. So I actually decided to go back to university. I was looking for ways of doing like a fast track, and the RIBA kind of didn't have anything in place. But at the same time, Loughborough fortunately had just started their kind of architecture department. So I ended up going back in second year and kind of being on the fast track for the bachelor's, and sort of doing BIM consultancy on the side to pay for that. And then this time last year, they obviously started doing their masters, which I'm on now. And it's kind of different from other masters in the sense the first year you're given the opportunity to either be in practice or research. And
Right.
like for me, I chose the research route, and the kind of premise is that you design your curriculum for the year. And it's a way of kind of trying to engage like this entrepreneurial drive to design what it is you think architecture is about in the future. And so for me, like my kind of core question was basically just like, how do we make AI useful for architects today? And that's sort of
Yeah.
like how I've arrived here, now. And obviously I've got the next year, like you say, coming up. So
Yeah. That's interesting. That's an interesting kind of setup, because I was going to say you've taken kind of an entrepreneurial route, whether it's like doing BIM stuff on the side. I think it's really cool that you've been able to like, spend time researching into this thing, and now you're kind of making it side hustle or potential business once you graduate. So
yeah,
that's quite an
definitely.
interesting format. So now you're going into your last year,
Yeah.
and you got to go through, I am assuming, quite an intense year ahead of you.
Yeah. As well as sort of keeping, like you're saying, the AI stuff on, like the
Yeah.
professional work, like going as well as, it could be challenging, but it's exciting at the same
Yeah.
time. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So talk us through a little bit about, how did you get started? Because like from my perspective, I saw you first started coming out when we started chatting. You were kind of looking at, you were taking kind of architects, star architects and stuff like that, taking a project and then using AI to generate more iterations of it, and then it's kind of, then I think it was kind of like MidJourney, Dalle, and kind of the other kind of platforms that everyone's jumping on now. So talk
Yeah.
us through like how that started coming out. Like, what was the process you were using at the beginning,
Yeah.
versus now a little bit?
Yeah. So the reason I kind of got into AI originally was probably like 2016, 2017, when Tesla was starting to go really hard on full self-driving. And
Right,
um,
right.
like the real world, like them trying to tackle the real world problems, and like how you actually get AI into the real world was like super inspiring and interesting.
Yeah,
Um, and so the ambitions that they were stating, and then kind of the fact that they were actually making progress, was super inspiring. So in sort of 2017, I took a few machine learning courses, and at the time they were very like primitive, and a little bit kind of boring because it was so early in the machine learning kind of trajectory in a way. But it was like, writing a neural net to understand what a dog or a cat is, which actually in hindsight
right.
turned out to be super important for everything we're doing. But a key kind of moment for me sort of committing to AI as an interest was Max Tegmark's book, Life 3.0.
Yeah.
I think it came out in 2018. But like after reading that, it was abundantly clear that AI is coming fast and will be this change that we've never seen before. And there's so much good as well as bad that will come with it. And it's kind of our job to make sure it goes in the good direction and not necessarily the bad
In the
direction.
right direction.
Yeah. And that line is super fine as well. So, and so like
Yeah.
at the time, like 2018, I think, there was some activity in the space in terms of architecture. So like I was watching a lot of videos by Neil Leach and Matthias Del Campo. And I took a few different bits and pieces, different courses like on GANs and stuff like that. But it was obviously at that stage, it was very, very limited. And then in 2020, around basically the Dalle paper came out from OpenAI, which had like
Mm.
the avocado chair, and I'd just written a dissertation before that on how AI was going to change architecture, and I completely missed this thing, and it just came out just after my submission. So
It's always the case, isn't it? But
yeah, right, and
especially with AI, I mean, it's like evolving so quickly.
Yeah. It's like it's so hard to keep up. Actually, that was like the first moment when I realized that perhaps these long form research projects are not the right way to capture the change, if that makes sense. And like social
Yeah.
media is a much better way of kind of archiving this process, or like weekly videos or
Mm.
something. Um, but yeah, like at that point, it, sort of the rise of these diffusion models, essentially the early diffusion models, I saw the potential that, you know, we could start to create variations and things off our existing images. And so this kind of this time last year, basically, like I said, my whole thing was like, how do we make this valuable and usable for architects today, and it not and sort of embrace AI early. And so last year, my work revolved around like designing from words, like how you do with MidJourney and Dalle now, but also like
Right.
how
Right.
do you create the variations? And the way that I found was the best way of like making architects kind of understand what I was doing was to create the variations of their work. And
Yeah.
hence, that's like why I started releasing the variations on Instagram. And yeah, that's basically the journey that I sort of took. And then obviously we hit May and July, and then it just explodes with Dalle and
Yeah.
Stable and, you know, MidJourney.
Yeah. Yeah. So what at the beginning when you were kind of because actually I think those early ones were kind of they were quite interesting in that like you were clearly giving it a direction, like this is the original design and let's iterate on it.
Yeah,
Now we're kind of in an era where, you know, we type chair from Zaha Hadid or
yeah,
something like that and see what it comes up with. So what kind of platform, or I don't know the right
uh,
terminology for AI, is it AI engine or
yeah.
um,
The
were
model.
you using at the beginning for that kind of, you know,
Yeah,
iteration of an existing thing?
yeah. So that was using basically it's called Dalle, which is a team of Russian people tried to recreate Dalle 1, because Dalle 1 never got released by
Mm.
OpenAI. So they sort of they released the paper and they released how they did it and all the tech, and they released this thing called Clip. Um, and essentially some Russian people basically trained their own model and called it Dalle, and then you could basically plug into that model to create the variant. So that's how it worked initially.
Interesting.
And all of the stuff, the all of the variations on my Instagram, for example, were made with Dalle, a bit different kind of variations on the kind of way it's done. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And then a few months later, I'm assuming, you know, MidJourney came out. I felt like MidJourney was the first kind of accessible one on the scene in that like um I think I'd signed up to a few of them, but that was the first one I could get into. Dalle,
Yeah.
I only just got into as we were messaging, and I don't know what happened. I was caught up in like I had to reach out to them and be like, "Can I please get in, man? I've been
Yeah.
waiting for 3 months."
Yeah.
um,
MidJourney killed it in their actual like. It's such an inspiring company, right? Like they just plugged into Discord's like platform and then made it so accessible where
yeah,
you just type. Um, yeah,
yeah, it seemed a bit you know, a bit hacky that you're in Discord and you see everyone's stuff that's generating. But I think, I mean, everyone, you know, remembers that first moment when they type something in and then it just creates something from scratch. And for sure, you know, at work and everything, you know, I opened it up and I was like, man, have you seen this? And everyone's kind of, you know, that initial excitement is just, it is mind blowing at, you know, that first time you actually put in some words and people are like, but what is it? It's just photoshopping like existing images. I was like, no, it's creating something completely new. It's not like
yeah,
finding things.
yeah.
Um, so yeah. So what about now? I see like I could maybe try pull up your Instagram page, but what talk us through a bit of your workflow now. Like
Yeah.
um, you seem to be using a combination of either MidJourney, Dalle, and Stable. Um, but talk us through like what's your process? Is it you've just kind of picked up um, you know, the ways to really get quite specific about things and create something with a little more of a targeted approach, or are you also kind of tinkering with it in Photoshop afterwards and that kind of stuff? Or what is
No,
your
not
process now for creating images?
yeah. So essentially, like I think MidJourney is just like this place where it's super great for like the initial conceptual kind of part, and like they seem to have really nailed this ability to be creative. So I'm
Hmm.
almost always starting in MidJourney for like, you know, conceptualizing things, and they have this new remaster
Yeah.
thing that helps us get a bit more of a different aesthetic quality. Then Stable, I'm I'm sort of using in a way that it's quite interesting for creating variations on designs, and it's also super interesting for creating like videos. So like one of the things I uploaded was like this
Yeah.
designing through time idea, which is like you have a start state and an end state, and it interpolates between the two. Um,
Hmm.
which I think is quite interesting in terms of like the future, where maybe you're describing a scene in real time, and it's sort of
Yeah.
building, you know, what happens. And then for Dalle is probably the weakest in my opinion right now, for architectural use, um,
Interesting.
but it has the outpainting potential right now, where you can expand on scenes pretty easily. Um, but yeah, honestly, I'm not
So
really
you're
using
saying,
Dalle at the moment.
okay, interesting. Because so you suggesting you're using a couple, like for example, you might start something in Midjourney and then bring it to Stable and
Yeah, exactly.
refine it or iterate on it, etc., etc.
Yeah, I mean,
That's interesting.
it's kind
How?
of like sorry, go ahead.
No, no, carry on.
It's kind of like what you were saying about like my goal is to get the control, um, is to find the way that we can control this best, right? So we can actually incorporate into workflows with some level of reliability. Um, and so
Yeah,
this kind of messing between models and using things for different things, like, is me trying to find the best ways of kind of doing that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I know you've kind of described it already, but I thought one question I think for the audience that I'm assuming may not have are super familiar with, the difference between Midjourney, Dali, and Stable. We don't necessarily have to get into the technical differences, but from my perspective, like you say, Midjourney does seem to create more bespoke things, right? It seems much more raw and like it is painting with pixels, so to speak. From the limited experimentation I've done with Dali, it almost seems like a super photoshopper. Like it's much more, it looks a bit more realistic and stuff, but it seems like it's kind of a blend of you can see it pulling maybe images from Google, and it does almost look Photoshop, but it's still quite impressive. Stable, I don't have any really experience with it. So
Yeah.
from your perspective in the context of like architecture or creating these images, what is each one best at the moment?
Yeah. I think Dali, although it's kind of sold as this realistic thing, I think it's way better for like graphic designs and
Hmm.
like art than it is for architecture. And I think it's got some constraints. I think they've basically added some photorealism constraints in there. Um, so for me, I would say that's like super good for like editing, like digital art in a way. But equally on
Yeah.
the other side, I think Midjourney, the way it feels like it's been trained, and the bias that they've added is that it's been trained off like ArtStation and like conceptual artists, and that's why it generally tends to produce these images that are very very well define what
Right.
they are and what they and Stable seems to sit in between. It's neither here or there. It's very sort of like hit and miss in the results you can get, but if you use it in the right way, it seems like you can pull it in any direction you want. And that's the
Yeah.
kind of feeling that I'm getting from using them. In terms of like how they work, it's all pretty much fundamentally the same. It's just they're pushing different things in different ways for their kind of characteristics and the nuances that they're trying to achieve, I guess. But yeah, Midjourney really feels like it's it's just been trained off ArtStation in a weird way. or at least focused on that.
It
But
seems like MidJourney is maybe leapfrog, because I remember at the beginning, I could get access to MidJourney and it was really exciting, but everyone was like, "Oh, I might, wait to get access to Dalle," and then
yeah,
people were getting access to Dalle, and it seemed like super realistic and pretty incredible. But then I felt like there was a shift, and people were kind of like, "Wow, MidJourney has developed like exponentially, in the last month or whatever it was." So it seems like there's a bit of a, you know, these things are obviously evolving extremely quickly. It
yeah,
seems like MidJourney came out, and also, like you said, the artist side. Like if you type in, you know, a famous artist, make uh, a cityscape like a famous artist or something like that. It seems to latch onto that quite well, or movie references like Blade Runner, cyberpunk, like all this kind of stuff. When you get into specifics like architecture, if you type in, famous architects, it might get some of them, but then also others, it's not quite there.
yeah,
So I feel like architecture is catching up.
yeah, definitely. I mean, Zaha Hadid is obviously the sort of one that has been like, over like used in like a lot of stuff. But I mean, a lot
Right,
of it just depends on, does this architect have a style that is very iconic in a way, or noticeable, or like um,
right.
as
Like
one of,
Zaha, it does have a
yeah,
very clear style, so you could see a computer can learn from the images and
right. And then
recreate that.
other kind of practices have like a different ethos. They're like some practices obviously focus on the process they take to get somewhere, and not necessarily the aesthetic
Yeah,
style. And the kind of end problem is that there's just not enough data that references towards that particular
yeah,
architect, um, for the AI to have learned to use that. Now it might change, it might not, but you know, like a lot of the sort of discussions between a few of the Discord people in terms of architecture has been, describing elements without architects being like specific architects in the tiles, and that's how I do a lot of my stuff now. Is no reference to any existing architect. It's
yeah,
more
yeah,
describing what elements you want to see, and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I think that's
I
kind
mean,
of yeah.
sorry, go on, go on.
It's just an important way of potentially going ahead.
Yeah. No, of course, that's like when you first get going with it, you try various like architects and see what it's learned, and if it's like, tuning into design or
Yeah,
these kind of architecture stuff. But no, so I mean, obviously, I've had a little bit of an insight of how we're, and I say playing with it at Big, and obviously talking to colleagues at other firms. Have you seen much of like architecture practices, or heard much of architecture practices really using it in some meaningful way? For example, like we've definitely, we've as soon as like people were getting access to it, people, I was sharing a few invites with people in the office, and then suddenly some teams were like, "Oh, let's just see, if we type in this, what does it give you?" And there's one side where, and I started to just tinker with it and be like, "Hey, what would a A-frame cabin in the woods look like, or a modular building in this?" And just seeing where it takes you, and it almost, for me, it almost became, and this is a little bit reductive, but it was almost like a president's thing, like idea. Is part of the kind of, you have a concept, you may look on, Pinterest, and you find some kind of ideas in that space, but you can now also go to, MidJourney and see where it takes you, and maybe it sparks an idea that you may not have thought of, which is the most exciting bit of it. Of course, that's like, barely scratching the surface of what we could really do with it. But have you seen much or heard of much like integration in practice, and
yeah,
that kind of thing?
yeah. I mean, I've seen some stuff. I've been working like freelance over the summer to like help onboard a bunch of practices in this, and I'm about to start something with someone really cool as well.
Awesome.
But the like the way that it's like what you're saying, right? Like no one really knows exactly where the value is in this right now, but it's definitely
Yeah.
incredibly valuable. So for each one, each of the kind of different experiences I've had over the summer, it's been entirely different. And the projects have been from sort of master plan to, a single building extension style type scale in a way. Um, but it's like you're saying, like what these tools at the moment allow us to do is just more quickly generate ideas, and the things it just expands the possibilities earlier, which allows us to make better
Yeah.
decisions in like the first instance, rather than us going pursuing ideas and not seeing the visualization of what that kind of is earlier on. I think people are really finding this useful to just um, figure out what it is they actually want as well. And so for
Yeah.
some of the clients I've kind of worked with, even just like atmospheric gestural feelings of spaces is equally as useful as something that we might go in and start designing from as like a more specific architectural kind of concept or idea. um, but I'm finding like people they're really seeing the value now. It's just like, how do we extrapolate that and convert that to something reliable? Like, and so like one of the things I've been struggling with is like, how do you price this stuff? It's not particularly uh, stable in the way it is. It's very sort of random, but there is definitely value there, and um, it's super interesting to hear that you guys are using it in your teams now as well, though, which is obviously a bigger scale. But yeah, I'd definitely say like conceiving ideas is number one where it's useful right now, and then um, like the variations people find exceptionally useful, but also equally exceptionally difficult because you end up with too much data. So there's like,
Right.
again, it's like, how does this work?
Too many options to go through
Too many
and
options, yeah.
explore.
And like analyzing and assessing them is difficult as well. And but yeah, like in general, people seem to be like really, really keen for it. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
But definitely at the moment, it seems constrained to the initial kind of conceptual part.
Yeah. And I guess it is currently constrained to creating images.
Yeah,
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't have a great understanding of exactly how it works. From my understanding, this engine has kind of gone and it's already filtered through the internet and learned from thousands and thousands of images. And the way I understand it basically is just placing pixels in this image um, based on what it's learned. Right, it's painting with pixels. So if you type in a dog, it's seen like a gazillion pictures of a dog, and it starts to place pixels based on how it's learned from images. Right? Is that
yeah. I mean,
loosely correct?
it's
Or?
it's it's pretty much there. Yeah. Like a lot of images have been labeled, and like they know um, what essentially a dog looks like, and all of these
Hmm.
different elements, and it just it uses noise and reverses it to put out that output in different formats in different ways. But yeah, exactly.
So then, of course, as an architect, my mind is racing ahead to the point where, theoretically, that same philosophy could apply to a 3D environment, right? You
The
could,
dreaded, yeah, this one. Yeah.
everyone's walking around with phones and they have, you can build like Google Earth is just a collection of images that is wrapped onto a mesh. And um, there's all this software that can stitch together pictures from people's phones, and you've got like a 3D map of the world. So in theory, this, I don't, I don't know if it's a bit reductive to say the next iteration is to go from pixels 2D images to 3D environments, and it starts to create landscapes, cityscapes. And, for us, we're thinking, can this thing create 3D models?
Yeah.
And
I mean,
I don't know is that something you've heard of before, or, have any, I appreciate that's like a, could be next year, could be like 10 years in the future. But I mean, theoretically, that could be the next kind of evolution right down the line.
Yeah. I think like the key part here is we've got to be careful what we wish for.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, it's happening. I think even MidJourney themselves are working on the extrapolation to 3D. There's a lot of work by NVIDIA that's tackling the sort of, you take an image and you get the 3D. If it's an image of a lamp or whatever, you can actually get the 3D stuff out today. It's very low poly, and but it's happening. And I was watching the Tesla AI day yesterday, and they're doing something where obviously they have the cars driving through the cities like all the time, and they're capturing all this data, and they're now using Houdini to be able to recreate like intersections of like junctions, and
like in a real world intersection.
Yeah, exactly. And something that they would send away, they'd send the data away to two artists to rebuild. It would take them 2 weeks. They've developed a way of doing it in 5 minutes. And,
Wow.
it just came out yesterday in the AI Day release. And, it's that sort of stuff that you're like, yeah, like if architects had that kind of power, 3D is definitely a lot more possible. Obviously, like for us, like we like very clean topology and geometry, and that step there, I think, could be kind of harder. But again, you just can't underestimate the kind of collective power of the internet developing this technology. And the sort of money that is being thrown at this is, insane. So, I mean, honestly, like we could probably see something within a year that's quite usable for a 3D state. And whether that be like from image to 3D, or from us typing in text, but it should be noted that also, like, I think Matthias Del Campo calls it that architecture is like a data poor industry in terms of like driving through a street and seeing the facades is one thing, but having 3D models shared between architectural companies is never existed, and there's not like a database somewhere where we have like identified what good architecture is or anything like that. So the approach is got to be slightly different, or we have to start teaming up and sharing data, or but at the end of the day, like it's hard to actually see what's going to happen as well, because a lot of this happens behind kind of closed doors. But that Tesla thing yesterday was, that really made me think that maybe this doesn't come from architects at all, and it's a byproduct of, self-driving.
Yeah. I mean, that's almost guaranteed, right? I think
so, yeah.
We're a trickle down technology industry. I mean, I think BIM is a great example of that. Is like the software that we have is not exactly cutting edge anymore.
Right.
And it's almost like a case of waiting for the game industry to kind of come in or look at visualization. It's taken a few years, and platforms like Enscape, Twinmotion have revolutionized the viz industry. That have, it's either architects adopting game engine technology to revolutionize our industry, right? So
yeah, definitely,
for sure, it will be coming from other industries, right? But so, I mean, at this point, maybe some people in the audience are sweating a little bit about the future of the safety of their jobs and stuff like that, which of course is that, that's the elephant in the room. And the first thing people ask about, on one hand, you feel we're fine as architects because we're creative, and computers can't do that. I think at this point MidJourney's like blown that idea out the water. I think in 2019 I went to Arcadia conference, and Harlan Miller from UN Studio gave a talk about the rise of AI and digitizing the industry and all this kind of stuff. And on one hand, when you think about what we do as architects, we get a brief, we deconstruct that brief, we come up with a concept, a direction. We go and look at presidents and get ideas. We go to architecture schools. We work for practices, and we learn from architects and other architects, by looking at images and recreating these things. Then we go and we, create something, which all of those steps right now can be implemented using AI right now. There's software that can deconstruct a brief. That's no problem. There's even open AI that I saw before this whole MidJourney and all this stuff started coming out. I think was it Dalle, or you could type in like a sentence and it would create a little story for you. So it could even create like the concept story. You can see how you can create images now. And that was the questions that people did send were like, what can AI, what skills that architects have can AI not take over and not be able to do? And I do appreciate I'm kind of giving you a loaded question here because it's very difficult to to exactly answer that. But it is going to change architecture practice for sure.
Yeah, it's a crazy. It's like the thing you're talking about, by the way, was GPT-3 for the writing your own kind of story and stuff. But yeah, the question is like, what value do we actually bring to the table? And it's very difficult, and it's so nuanced depending like what part of the project you're in, what kind of industry segment you're in. But the reality is like you say, this will bring significant disruption. Arguably, it's already bringing quite a lot of disruption to maybe the people in the office who come up with the ideas, or like a direction, or I think in general, like the stage 4 area, so like the detailed design part, is quite safe for the time being. But I think like as an industry, we seriously need to reconsider, number one, the education time span. That's too long. Like, it makes no sense. Like in this world now, where it's 7 years, right? So it's in the UK, it's 7 years because of the 2 experience years. That, like, can you even imagine like what AI looks like in 7 years? Like, and educators have to design a framework now on how to train people for the future. Like, that's just insane. Like, we've just seen this exponential summer of progress. So I think like education needs a rethink now, and the time horizons that we've been used to in the past, when we've been on a linear progression of technology, no longer apply in a world that's exponentially changing. And it can be so bad that by the time you finish your bachelor's, all of the framework is obsolete to a degree, depending on what new tools come along. So, I don't want to be like a doomsdayer, but it does kind of feel like we have to be super careful what we sell the profession as. But likewise, I think if we do embrace it early, and we set up practices to really facilitate the machine learning, unlocking new potential and new possibilities, I think it could be like amazing to see like what happens. But in terms of like being safe, I'm not sure anyone necessarily is, because like what a lot of people don't talk about is the other side of AI in architecture, which is like SpaceMaker, which was acquired by Autodesk, and then also Xcool as well, as a Chinese company, very kind of similar. And SpaceMaker obviously is working on a lot of stuff to do with like feasibility decisions. So, how many, how can we optimize a site, and how much can we fit on here, depending on the sort of space standards, the environmental principles, optimizing a building. And that's obviously eating into work that traditionally architects would have done as well. So, if there is this kind of double whammy, like people attacking the creative side and also the sort of optimization
The
side,
technical-ish side kind of thing, right?
Yeah, the kind of technical side. That being said, I think like, our focus should be on the fact, number one, embracing it, and number two, realizing that this is a potential for us to expand what architecture is, and to get beyond the image. It feels like architecture has been stuck at the image level for a long time. There's like, I think it was an ATN episode talking about this, about like the sort of graveyard of just architectural concepts that never ever see the light of day. And maybe the metaverse was the idea of getting that out, I think, was the discussion.
I think I've talked a lot about, like, we've become image creators as architects,
right,
and we just endlessly create these images and pump them out, and that's it, they just die, or someone gets built. But this AI and SpaceMaker, for anyone listening that doesn't know what SpaceMaker is, it's one of those kind of plugins where you kind of draw lines and it automatically draws your parking layouts for you, or you have like an outline of a building and it fills it with resi units and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, Will, this is coming at the same time. I think there's a lot of, like you say, education takes 7 years, and forget about AI. We're not even teaching kids like how to use Rhino or Revit and Grasshopper and all this kind of stuff. So let alone AI. But you could leapfrog all that and go straight to AI if it gets that advanced level. We're also, let's not joke, architects are globally overworked, underpaid.
Yeah.
It's a business model that is just service based. We only deal with bespoke, one of a kind products. We're essentially an R&D firm, and so I've always seen the next iteration of architecture practices being much smaller. A smaller group of really teched up architects that are able to embrace the power of technology to tackle larger projects and more projects. And I guess that the main thing is, like, can we automate the things that we just don't need to waste our time doing? And I've said this in a couple podcasts, like, automating a building regs checker. Like, no one loves going around and checking that your doors comply and all this kind of stuff. Drawing plans line by line, that's what Revit is good at, and there'll be way better iterations of that in the future. So I'm still trying to stay positive that, like, I think it's about automating what we don't need to spend time doing, so we can input on where we do add value, which is the creative kind of, creative thinking and creative solutions.
Yeah, definitely.
But in order to do that, it's the architects that embrace technology that will, prevail a little bit faster, I think.
Yeah. I completely agree. Like, even if you just start to work through the design process and figure out the areas that we do want to automate, like, even arguably that process from going from a conceptual image to modeling something is a piece that we kind of want to keep. And then maybe it's like you want to optimize that 3D model you've just made based off, like the SpaceMaker principles and stuff like that. I think you're right. Like, we've got to kind of identify the areas we really want to change, but the kind of problem is convincing the wider world that this is what needs to happen as well, rather than giving necessarily developers a one-click button to generate a building. I think like a super interesting comparison is what happened to translators when the likes of Google Translate came up, and suddenly everyone was a translator now. Like, you can translate whatever you need to. That democratization of language translation. What happens if that happens to design?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Design me a 3-bedroom house that looks like a Devon Longhouse, and
yeah,
boom, it just
yeah. So I think like there's gonna be these sort of things we need to be closely watching. And if the barriers to entry to high end design become like what happened to high end translation, that's kind of the ultimate end point, right? Of like, oh geez, this is but at that point other things in society will also be at that it will be
right.
mass
We'll see it
chaos,
in a
right?
lot of other industries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So but like these small teams that you're speaking of, like with where it's like techified kind of I think it will ultimately be quite good for architects, and if it kind of happens in the right way, in the right set of circumstances. And um but yeah, like I definitely agree. Like we should be trying to put in machine learning wherever we can on all the boring stuff first, which is where my original dissertation went. But I completely missed the creative part. And that seems to be where like the sort of tech people want to get better at being able to create stuff, maybe even just for themselves, but without um, the fact that it affects us quite significantly in that realm.
Yeah.
So yeah, but totally agree. Like it's going to small, lean kind of companies, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Which could be a great thing. We'll get more, less of these massive giant architecture firms, and
Yeah.
more smaller, nimble ones.
It also kind of feeds into the cost of living of cities, and the fact that most of these bigger firms are obviously in the cities. And then you talk about like wages being low for architects, and the business model is just it's an unscalable physical product, and that's just the worst place to exist if you want to make some money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what? I'll ask. We'll go through two more questions, and I think we've kind of tackled some of the questions that have been sent in already. It was like,
oh, sweet.
How do we translate these images from 2D to 3D, which you've already kind of touched on, and what kind of architect skills do you think can be automated with AI? I thought I'd finish on a couple questions of like, one, what are you excited about next in this space? I know you've kind of hinted at a couple things already, but is there anything on the horizon at the moment that's exciting you, or is it kind of like the evolution of MidJourney and these kind of platforms are still keeping you excited?
Yeah, I think I'm mostly excited about enhancing different people's workflows right now. Like, can they achieve better results? Can we do it quicker? Can they live like a less intense must work all hours night, like just to get something off?
Yeah.
So like, can we regain our human life a bit more?
Yeah.
I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited that I think, it's shown us how uncreative humans actually are to a degree, with the amount of different options that we could go down and look at. So I'm excited to see like how people use that for, people who are potentially super sophisticated in the existing process, how they then take that and then that amplifies what they're able to produce. I think that's very exciting. And I think like, in general, like this is a reflection moment for architects and architectural institutions, and I think now is the time that we have to just fundamentally shift like what we are as as an industry, because I think if we leave it too long, it'll be too late. And so now is kind of the radical change to start like understanding the economics of AI, like the economics of AI, the education of AI, how we stay relevant, how we ensure that like what our values are, that we want to see like a cool built environment. That's like what we are all in this business for, in a way. How do we actually enable that to happen and set the right sort of existing precedent for the future where AI will exponentially get better. So I think it's super exciting just to be here at this time when it is the start of everything. And I think that
Yeah.
in itself is enough to a degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're in the right place at the right time. Already over the summer, you've kind of, from when I think we met up in London, things have changed a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
For yourself and in the space of AI.
Right. It's been
Um,
crazy.
yeah, crazy summer. Huh? I think one question we could kind of finish on or touch on is like where one with these kind of image generation things that you can get access to. How much is there of a skill of being able to point it in the right direction? And because for example, when you start off with Dalle, you type in make me a an alien mixed with a cat or something like that, and then you see later on that there's like a ways to you kind of add on tags, like you see a lot of people putting 8K octane and realistic render and et cetera, et cetera, and you can kind of manipulate it a bit more, and you almost become a master of AI hashtags. So how much kind of skill or like a skill set is required to get good at these? Um, and the people in the audience who haven't touched this, where's the best place to go and get started? I guess it's like signing up and waiting to get access, really.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully, I'm not anymore with that. But
Yeah,
yeah, like how much of it is a skill? The real thing is to not really get too tied down with trying to understand the exact details of how a model works with the words, because these things change so
mm,
fast. And so a lot of the mistakes I made last year was spending ages like just typing in different numbers, different parameters to see how it would react and stuff, and now that's completely obsolete. So we could probably assume that it doesn't, it will soon be obsolete in that sense, a bit later on. So in terms of skill, the best thing to do is to just get started typing different things in, but then keep the studies super simple. And it's really you've really kind of got to understand that this 3D, this kind of latent space that we're doing a walk in, is massive. So even if you run the same prompt 100 times, it can end up in different places each time. And so there
yeah,
isn't actually that much of a, the goal is to point it as quick as you can into the right space, obviously. And that comes with experience and just like typing, but it's not something to get super fixated on, because it could change. And then that knowledge is no longer relevant. And I think this message is like, is what we really need to be focused on, is like how, because the tools change so much in the way they work, we need to learn what to spend our time on. And
yeah,
so yeah, that would be my lesson. Like there's skill in pointing it in the right direction, there's no doubt, and the only way you get that is by playing with it and watching some videos on that. But it's not something to be fixated on, because the turnover of models is too quick, and that's kind of I
yeah,
guess my
yeah.
advice in
That's
that point. And then
yeah,
where can you like learn stuff from? There's a YouTube channel called Design Computation Human by owner Goon, I think his name is, and he's a computational design manager at New Balance, the shoe. But he approaches this from a more theoretical level. So no matter the kind of model, he's trying to teach how to sort of test any model, right? So that would be a really good place to go. And then the second one, if you're more interested in like AI art models in general, would be Matt Vid Pro AI on YouTube, and he's sort of covering, as new models are sort of announced, he's sort of covering that space.
cool. I'll definitely check those out myself as well. Um, Great. I think so. Also, maybe plug in where can people follow your work and get in touch if you have anything coming up in the future. You can you're more than welcome to plug it. But
Yeah.
yeah,
So
give everyone a bit of a shout out of your where they can follow you.
yeah. So I'm basically on Instagram is probably the best place to find me. So that's wg.xyz. And everything I'm doing will be kind of posted there first. I'm sort of working on some more bespoke architectural software that helps kind of manage some of the AI aspects. And, I'll be announcing that at some point soon, working with a couple of other people on Instagram for that. And yeah, like anything new, we'll go there first. So
Awesome. Well, great. Is there any topics that you think we haven't touched, or is there anything you want to let the audience know?
No, I think like in general, we just not got to panic, and we just got to we got to really just embrace it for our values as architects, and be quite clever with how we do it. I think is important.
I think that's a great.
Ask the hard questions that we wouldn't normally do.
Yeah, that's a great way to finish. Do not panic, guys. It's going to be good in the end, hopefully. Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Will, and being our first guest on our newly formed podcast. As we said, this is now this is our new format of pre-recording and posting them up on YouTube later. We will have, we'll tinker with this format, so we'll have like live audience at some point where you can ask questions directly. But for now, we'll stick with this. But Will, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you guys on the next episode in a few more weeks.
Thanks, Ollie. Cheers.